If you joined us in the last video, you saw that with just a few nodes and a few lines of code, we were able to generate a main menu that's granted a little basic, but the play button plays our game and the quit button would quit. But keep watching to see how we can go from something that looks like this to something that looks like this with just a few more nodes and a little help from themes. The very first step that I'm going to take is add a location in my project for my themes. So I can create a new folder and we'll call this themes. This will just house all of my themes and all of my styles that I'm going to be using for the remainder of this upgrade. Now the next thing I'll do is I'll just pick any of my buttons here, and in this case I'll grab that first play button. Now in the inspector all the way down in control, we have a theme section, and right now this should be empty, but we'll create a new theme here real quick. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to save this into that themes folder. I'll call this basic button, just a very basic button theme. Now from here, once the theme is created, we're going to have a preview down here that's going to show me everything about this theme. Now by default, because I created it off a button, it's going to show me just my different types of buttons. In this case, we also have text edit, the different tabs and trees here. To be able to use this for the button itself, we can hit the plus sign over here to add a new type of node. And first things first, we'll select button and we'll add type. Now, once we do this, our type will show up as button, and we're going to see all of the different attributes that we have, the different colors for our fonts, any of the separation we have, the fonts, and more importantly, we have our styles. These styles are going to dictate how our buttons look anytime they show up on screen, assuming that we assign that theme to them. The easiest change to make for our buttons is going to be the background. Depending on how our button is, whether it's just by default, it's being hovered, it's being clicked, it's going to have a different view style associated to it. So over here on the right-hand side, we have normal, hover, focus, disabled, and even pressed. Our most basic change is going to be for the normal. So I'll add a new style here and we'll just do a box flat because in this case, we're just going to go with a solid color. Almost immediately, we're going to see a change because we're going to get a style here for the button itself. Our previews are going to update. So the normal button, our check button, our check box are going to update, and visually on screen in our editor, we're going to see that color change. But we probably want to do a little bit more than just have it be a default gray. So I can click into my style and I can specify my background color. Now for me, I want to go with just my basic color from my logo. So we'll go with an RGB value of 66, 33, and 11. And as we do this, we're going to see the preview update and we're going to see it update in our 2D editor. There are a couple other changes that we can make here. We have a border width and information about our border. Now, if we start playing with these values, we'll see that it's going to build up the border around that play button. If we need to change the color, we can do so just as easily from this menu. And I'll change it to my other color from my logo. And we'll say that we'll make it a nice tan color here. And if we zoom in on that play button, we're going to see that it puts a 2-pixel border around our entire button. Sometimes we don't want that. In this case, it might look good with just a bottom and a right border. But what I don't like about this is that it comes together at a point in the corner. And we can always add a corner radius. So we'll go bottom right and just a 2-pixel radius, and we can see that it's going to round that off. If we want to add a shadow, there's a section for that. And if we want to play with the anti-aliasing options, we can do that as well. Turn it off, turn it on. So maybe we want it to be a hard border or we want it to be more of a fuzzy border, that we can do that. In my case, I'll leave it off. And what we're left with is, 2 quick changes that made this thing look pretty good. So now when we go to play our game, we're going to notice a couple things. Well, one is that our button looks how it did on screen. The other thing we're going to notice is that as I hover over it, or if I click on it, it's not going to look exactly the way we would expect. It reverts back to whatever the basic default is. The other thing we're going to notice if I restart my game is that the options and the quit don't follow these same view styles. They're not following my theme that I created. Both of these things are really easy fixes for us. The easier of the two is to get my options and my quit button to follow these themes as well. And to do so, I can just go to my options node, in the control section of the inspector, I can just load my theme and that basic button theme. And if I do that for both the options and the quit here, we're going to see that now when I play this, and even in the editor, we have the different buttons doing what we would expect them to here in my main menu. The other issue we ran into, that the hover and the click aren't maintaining our theme, they're reverting back, is still easy to fix, just takes a little bit more work. So the first thing is I'll go back into that play button to get into my theme. And then over in the bottom right, we have the different statuses for the button. Is it disabled? Is it focused? Is it hovered? Or is it pressed? We could go through and manually redefine everything, but for me, I want them to be relatively close to what I have as my basic. So I have that brown with the tan around the outside. For my hover, maybe I want the brown to be a little bit lighter, and when I press, I want the brown to be a little bit darker. The quickest way for me to do this is to just save the existing style that I have. Now, first things first, I need to make this unique to this scene. Then I can come and I can save this. And I'll just put this in that same themes folder, but this time we'll just call this BB for basic button style box flat. And I'll save that. Now, for all the other different statuses, I can just create a new style. I can load that existing one, then make that unique, and that allows me to come in and make a change to it. So in this case, for my hover, we can just make this a little bit lighter. Coming back into this theme, I'll do the same thing for pressed. Add a new one, I will quick load, get my basic button style, make this one unique, and then we'll go a little bit darker here. So when we click on it, it'll be a little bit darker. If all goes well, when I hit play, I can hover over my buttons. They do get lighter. And if I click on one, in this case, I'm clicking and holding so we can see that, it will be darker brown. With our buttons behaving with the correct color when we just look at them, we hover or we press, there's a couple other changes we can make to take our main menu to the next level. My next change I want to make is to move away from the default font. Now, depending on where you're getting your font from, you're just going to download that file and stick it somewhere in your project directory. I grabbed mine off of Google Fonts, made sure it had an open font license, and then I have that font sitting here in my themes folder. If I go back into that play, go back into my theme, and we switch over to the font, we can pretty easily just override the font and then drag and drop it from my folder and place it in. And almost immediately, we're going to see that play button, that options button, and that quit game button change their font. If I need to, I can come in and change the size of the font just by overriding it and then moving that value up or down. In this case, 20 seems okay to me. I might need to come in and make modifications to it later. What I really love about themes, though, is that although we're seeing it here inside of our editor on my play options and quit game, down in my theme preview, we're going to see the other options here as well. So my checkboxes, what are they going to look like? My check buttons, what are they going to look like? The different menu buttons and our options. So I can see that for an option button, we have a couple more changes we would need to make here inside of the theme to get them to show up exactly how we want. At this point, I'd argue that our main menu is looking pretty okay. It's a lot better than the basic one we had, but there are still some more changes because as it stands right now, we have just a default gray background and my buttons are just off in space to the top left. They're pinned to that top left corner. So there are a few more changes we can make just to take this thing to the next level. To add a background to my scene is actually fairly straightforward. I'll just go to the top level control node for my main menu, in this case, my menu main node, and we can just add in a texture rectangle. And this is going to apply a rectangle that I can assign a texture to. Now for this texture, I can grab any old image. In this case, we're going to go with just my YouTube background for my channel. What we'll notice that when I put this texture inside of this texture rectangle, I try to resize it. I can't make it any smaller, I can make it larger. And if I start to try to plug in a smaller value to fit our screen, it's not actually going to do anything. So we want to make sure that under the texture rectangle in our inspector, we just say ignore size. And that's going to allow me then to plug in my values. Now we have to keep in mind the different scaling to make sure it all fits. But when we're done, That should then fit our scene as long as we set it to the correct values. Now the last thing here is just making sure that texture rectangle is on top of my VBox container, because the stuff on top of our tree will be more in the background than the stuff at the bottom. Now, even though I set this to the middle like I thought I wanted, we're going to notice that it's a little bit overlaid. So I can just take that VBox container, and in my case, I'll just slide the whole thing down just by holding the arrow keys. And if you hold shift, we can go to a bigger extent. And I can just position that somewhere that looks good. Now with that in place, when I hit play here, we're going to get the nice background logo in the middle, play, options, quit game, and everything looks a lot better than it did just a few short minutes ago.